Welcome. In this video, we'll take a look at the last section in 3.3, working with the odd and even functions. So an even function is a function for which f of negative x is equal to f of x for all x in the domain of f. And then the odd function is a function for which f of negative x is equal to negative f of x for all x in the domain of f. So specifically working with our trig functions, we can notice that the cosine of negative pi over 6 is equal to the cosine of pi over 6. They're both equal to square root 3 over 2. So this makes the cosine function an even function. So regardless of what angle we have in the cosine function, we could always negate that angle and we'll get the same result for the cosine. The sine function, on the other hand, is an odd function. By an example, here is negative sine of negative 45 degrees is equal to sine of 45 degrees. This is given the example that sine is an odd function. So when we negate the angle and negate the outer sine, we will get the same result for the sine function. So let's take a look at three examples using this odd and even identity. Question A gives us cosine of negative 4 pi over 3. And so the first thing that we can change here is cosine is an even function. So we can note this is even right away. And since it's even, we know that the cosine of negative 4 pi over 3 is the same as cosine of 4 pi over 3. Those two things are the equivalent. And so we can use just some reference angles here to solve the rest. If I wanted to draw this angle 4 pi over 3, 4 pi over 3 is just over pi units, so pi units is the same as 180. And so 4 pi over 3 would wrap around to the third quadrant. And it will happen to have a reference angle of pi thirds. So this reference angle will be pi thirds, or 60 degrees if you prefer. So if we notice what quadrant we're in quadrant 3. Without using our unit circle, we can think about what our cosine for that angle will be. The cosine of 60 degrees, or cosine of pi over 3, is equal to 1/2. And since we're in the third quadrant, the cosine function is negative. And so here, this result will be negative, and it will take on the reference ratio of 1/2. So this will end up being negative 1/2. You certainly can confirm that taking a look at the unit circle, but you can work through each of these problems without necessarily having the written unit circle out. The second example, part B, we can take a look at the sine of negative 120 degrees. This is an odd function for the sine function. And so this tells us that this will be equivalent to negative sine of 120. So we can negate the outer sine and negate this inner sine. That would be the definition of an odd function. So we could use negative sine of 120. So 120 degrees, we can draw that angle in the second quadrant. this will have a reference angle of 60 degrees. And so for our quadrant here, all students take calculus. Our sine of 60 degrees will be that reference. And since the sine is positive in the second quadrant, we know sine of 60 is actually going to be equal to sine of 120. They're the same. And that happens to be the square root of 3 over 2. So this will end up being a negative since we have a minus sign here, and the sine of 120 is square root 3 over 2. The last example we have is the secant of negative 5 pi over 4. Well, the secant function we'll have to do a little bit more work with is 1 over the tangent. So this is 1 over the cosine of negative 5 pi over 4. Cosine is, again, this is going to be even. And so we can rewrite this as 1 over cosine of 5 pi over 4 as a positive angle. So first, we want to go out and just find what is cosine of 5 pi over 4, and then we'll just take the reciprocal of that. So we'll draw that angle 5 pi over 4. That's a little bit over pi units again. And this reference angle will happen to be pi fourths. So if we first consider that reference angle, if I had the cosine of just pi over 4, this is equal to the square root of 2 over 2. But I am in the third quadrant where the cosine is negative. So the cosine is negative in that quadrant. And so this will be equal to negative square root 2 over 2. And so when I put this back, I'll have 1 divided by negative root 2 over 2. And so we'll want to take the reciprocal of that result, which would give us negative 2 over the root of 2. Or if we rationalize that, that would be negative 2 roots 2 over 2, or just negative root of 2. So that one took a little bit to work out, but again, we can still use this odd and even technique to help with a few negative angles when they come up. So this wraps up section 3.3. You can also take a look at the recorded lecture notes from section 3.1 through 3.3 if you missed any of those details. Thanks for watching.